Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us today for our first University Express class of the spring semester. My name is Katie Earle, and I'm the coordinator of the program, and I work for the Erie County Department of Senior Services. And we're joined here today with Mark O'Brien, who's the Commissioner of Mental Health for Erie County. Welcome, Mark.
Good morning.
Okay. We have some new folks joining us here today, and since it is our first class, just some quick housekeeping things for you. We are recording this session, and if all goes as planned, I'll be able to post it on our website in a day or so. You have joined muted and without your video showing. It's not that you've done anything wrong. That's just the settings for our program. And as you've heard me say, there are other people in attendance here today. It's just that we're in an anonymous participation mode, so you think you're the only one, but you're not. Throughout Mark's presentation, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A panel. As soon as you think of them, when I see them, I'll let Mark know what we have going on. So if you're new to us, you'll get your Q&A panel likely at the bottom right-hand side of your WebEx screen. It's a little box with a question mark in it. And if you're on a tablet or smartphone, poke or touch your screen. That'll bring up your control panel, and then you'll be able to find your Q&A panel from there. So we'd like to thank the sponsors of our program, which is my Department of Senior Services, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, Excelsior Orthopedics, and Wegmans for everything they do to make this program possible. And as always, please don't hesitate to contact us at Senior Services if you or a loved one need help. We're at 858-8526. Now, let's see who our speaker is today. Mark O'Brien is a licensed clinical social worker with over 35 years of mental health, child welfare, and healthcare experience. A 1983 SUNY Buffalo School of Social Work graduate, currently he is the Commissioner of Mental Health for Erie County. He previously held the same position as Director of Mental Health Services in Orleans County and Interim Director in Genesee County. He's also the chair of the 8-County Regional Planning Consortium. Additionally, he's in private practice in Tonawanda, where he specializes in treating survivors of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, as well as family and couples therapy. He's also an instructor in the Diocese of Buffalo Pastoral Care Training Program, teaching about family systems and working with survivors of abuse. He resides in Grand Island with his wife. He is a proud father of 3 children with 5 grandchildren and an avid cyclist, and he possesses a black belt in Taekwondo and is a former instructor. That's pretty awesome, Mark. Welcome. Thank you for being here today. Turn it over to you.
Katie, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to Monday. They do seem to come too quickly these days for most of those folks who head out to work on Mondays. So we're going to talk today about anxiety disorders and understanding anxiety and panic disorders. But first, a little message from our sponsors about what is anxiety. And anxiety is something that is normal, healthy, and necessary to function. So people think in terms of, oh, I'm a little anxious about something, but in many cases, anxiety can be very functional for you. If you have an exam in the morning, if you're still in the school and you're anxious about that and it motivates you to study, great. If you're an athlete and you're a little anxious about your performance and motivates you to train harder, again, great. If you are heading into a situation where there are actual types of dangers or things to be aware of, anxiety can keep you safe. So it's one of those emotions, like anything, that the difference between health and pathology is degree. So just to throw out there that all anxiety is not bad. Anxiety can be healthy, normal, and actually necessary to keep us alive. So what is anxiety? When we talk about anxiety as something to be concerned about, anxiety is defined as a state consisting of psychological and physical symptoms brought about because the sense of apprehension at a perceived threat. And it's going to be really important to note the difference between psychological and physical symptoms. because when we talk about what you do about that, it'll be important for anybody who's experiencing anxiety to notice, what am I experiencing first? Am I experiencing it at a physical level, or some would call a somatic level, or am I experiencing distressing thoughts? And here's the thing about anxiety, and especially with anxiety disorders, if they're in terms of distressing thoughts, the logical brain can say, I know this isn't real. I know this isn't logical. I know this makes no sense, but yet I'm still anxious about it. So it's important to know where that's coming from. So anxiety is those states of physical and psychological symptoms. Fear, on the other hand, is that the threat, the external threat, is perceived to be more concrete, present, or imminent. And again, fear is not necessarily a bad thing. Fear can keep us safe. It's like when you have a young child and you don't want them to touch a hot stove, you want them to be afraid of that hot stove a little bit, because better that than having a burned hand. So fear is instinctive. It is one of those things that are at the back part of the brain, at their what they call the reptilian brain. You've heard of the reactions of fight or flight. Well, usually there is three parts to that reaction: fight, flight, or freeze. And those are the most basic types of reaction. Fight means that you are at some threat for your initial, your how you are right now, and you are putting up a defense. Flight obviously is you're heading off. When you cannot fight something, when you cannot rail against it, and you can't leave, then the most reptilian, the most basic instinct then is to freeze. And that becomes almost a surrender type of mechanism. So it's important to know there's a difference between fear and anxiety. In an anxiety disorder, the exposure to a feared object can trigger an intense attack called a panic attack. And during these panic attacks, now, when you hear the term generalized anxiety disorder means that anxiety is considered free-floating, unfocused fear. And that is to real or perceived threats. And those perceived threats may just mean the fear that I'm going to lose control. It could mean the fear that I'm going to make a fool of myself and look bad in front of others. The most common anxiety disorder, besides generalized anxiety disorder, is what's called social phobia. One of the social phobias, the most common social phobia, is the fear of public speaking. Is the fear that I will forget what I'm talking about and look foolish in front of everybody who I'm talking to. And of course, one of the best ways to deal with that is advanced preparation. And anybody who's taken any public speaking courses, they'll say, don't write out everything you're going to, because if you lose your place, you write out your main points you want to cover and come back to them. And then you fill in between. Essentially, really what I'm doing right now is we go through the PowerPoint. So during a panic attack, these symptoms are seen as so severe that the person fears that they're suffocating. They're going to have a heart attack. They're losing control. The somatic symptoms are out there. Their muscles are tightening. Their chest is racing. And as your chest is racing, your breathing becomes more shallow. You're pulling in more carbon dioxide than oxygen, which causes your body to crave it more, which makes you feel that higher sense of panic and impending doom. Soon it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where the person begins to fear having a panic attack itself, which sets off further panic attacks. It's kind of like the opposite of what Franklin D. Roosevelt said when he said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. that's really a good way to look at it here is because when we talk about how you cope with this, when somebody says, I'm afraid I'm going to throw up in front of somebody. Well, have you ever? Well, no. I'm afraid I'm going to have a heart attack. Have you ever? No. So it's the fear of fear itself. So in this case, a vicious cycle takes hold, with the panic attacks becoming more frequent and severe, even occurring, as I say, out of the blue. And paradoxically, the more somebody tries to protect themselves from it and keep it away at bay, the more power they give to it. And one of the ways when I'm working with somebody who has an anxiety disorder is to think about it is think about when you were a little kid and you're about 8 years old and the light's off and you hear some kind of bump in the night and there's some noise and immediately you think that there's a monster under the bed. And there's these big eyes that are going to come out from under there and they're going to swallow you up. And that child thinks this is what's going to happen. So you think, okay, what's going to keep me safe is I'm going to get under the covers and I'm going to pull those covers over my head and I'm going to be safe from the monster. Well, what happens? Does the child think that the monster's still under the bed? No. Now the child thinks that the monster has crawled out from under the bed and is on the other side of the covers. So their world is even smaller and that monster is even bigger. And one of the hardest things to do, but the most necessary thing to do is, what do? You reach over and you turn on the light. And when you turn on the light, you can look under the bed and you see, oh, there's nothing there but your bunny slippers with the little eyes and the big ears. And I know Katie has bunny slippers because she talked about that, just before the presentation. So, in its simplest terms, that's how we look at it. So let's talk about the panic cycle. And I'm going to go through each one of these circles here because it may be a little hard to read what they are. So the panic cycle. This is something that for anybody who has ever had a panic attack, it's like if you remember the Sims clothing stores, Cy Sims used to say, an educated consumer is our best customer. The more you know about anxiety disorders, the more you understand, the better off you are. Being armed with information here is huge. It is the fear of the unknown. And remember, they say courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is overcoming fear. So remember, fear and anxiety in reasonable levels is healthy, normal, and understandable. It's when it paralyzes, that's something else. So what's the panic cycle? In the top circle, it's what's called a dysfunctional belief. You have some type of belief that I'm going to melt down, I'm going to be embarrassed, I'm going to have a heart attack, I'm going to freeze. Whatever that panic inducing thought is, it's dysfunctional. It is a belief. Okay? And when we talk about our feeling levels, and this is our feeling levels both emotionally through our limbic system, but it also ties into our CNS, our central nervous system. There's a huge tie here because one feeds off the other. And reality then becomes distorted. And for mental health terms, I'm going to give you a definition of reality. Reality, fact or reality, when somebody says, well, you made me feel such and such. I felt angry. You made me feel this way. And I said to Katie, well, Katie, you know what? That's a very nice top you have on there. My grandmother used to wear something like this. Well, it's a very neutral statement. She may take it as, oh my God, I look old-fashioned and out of style. And then she may feel very upset. I can see from her face she does. She may feel upset and all these types of things, humiliated. Or I could follow up with, and you know what? My grandmother was the most fashionable person I ever met. She was a professional, and I just thought she was great. Well, now you've got a whole different reaction to the same neutral type of statement. So the big point is fact is something that is observable through any of our senses. It is measurable, and it is something that we have communal agreement on, consensual agreement on. We've agreed that this is 2021. Whether you're Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, or whatever, we have, as a planet, essentially agreed that this is the year that we're living in. However, not everybody dates things from the birth of Christ, but we have agreement on it. This is now Wednesday. We've adopted the Julian calendar. So that's actually reality. It's good to know what reality is versus what's happening in an anxiety disorder, because an anxiety disorder distorts the key component we're talking about, and that's perception. And perception is how we take in reality. It modulates for that. And there's all sorts of things that can come into how we take in our perception. It can be whether you're 20-something years old as opposed to 60-something years old. It could be from your age, your experiential background, whether you've had a very smooth upbringing, whether you've had a traumatic upbringing, whether you were raised in poverty, whether you're raised in affluence, whether you're a person of color who experienced discrimination, or whether you were somebody else who experienced what have you. These things inform us as we take in the world. Perception is all about how we take in the world. That's where our feeling states truly come from, is how we take in the world. So we have a dysfunctional belief that something really bad is going to happen. So there becomes internal and external triggers. And the external triggers could be something from the outside that's around us, something that reminds us of something bad. It could be a smell, it could be a sight, it could be a sound, it could be being around something or somebody, etc. Anything that triggers us into some of these reactions. There also could be internal triggers that, as we get into this dysfunctional cycle, we become hyper alert to what's going on with us. And those could be like heartbeat. Oh my God, what's going on? Something else is happening. And you start going down the rabbit hole, if you will. So once we get one of these triggers, then we do an appraisal. But we don't realize we're doing an appraisal. Is what is the risk to us? What am I really facing here? Or what does my anxiety telling I'm facing here? What's the perceived threat versus the resources? Mean our, when we have kids or whatever, they fall down, they scrape their knee, they get a little bruise, get them up, dust them off again, and on they go. They have to learn to handle these small bumps and bruises of everyday life. What are our strengths? What do we bring in? What are our capacity to do these things? And basically that comes down to two types of things. One is efficacy and the other is effectiveness. The terms are not important to remember, but the concept is efficacy is the belief that we have control over and master of ourselves and our environment. Effectiveness is the experience that we generate from having done things successfully. Okay. So as we get aware of this risk versus what we have, we start experiencing anxiety symptoms. Okay. Now it's really important for anybody who is experiencing anxiety symptoms or knows somebody who's experiencing those symptoms is to really have an idea of which comes first, chicken or the egg, because that's where you're going to go to first. And they may say, oh, it's so close together, I really don't know. Okay. So anxiety symptoms can be any number of things. And we're going to get into what those are shortly. I'm going to list those out. But in its simplest terms, are they thoughts that's in my head of saying, this is going to happen if I don't do this, this is going to happen, oh my God, these are the risks? Or are they physical symptoms? my chest is tightening, my heart is racing, my pulse is pounding, I'm getting sweaty, I'm getting diaphoretic, all these types of things. What's coming first? And it may seem that to come at the same time, you say, I don't know. Okay. So then the person starts getting these symptoms, and then they start over focusing on the internal processes. What's going on with me? Oh my goodness, I don't know what's happening. I'm over analyzing what's going on in terms of all these symptoms I'm experiencing, in terms of the tightening, the chest, the pounding, all this type of stuff. And so I'm starting to lose really what's going on in the world around me. As I focus on these things and become hyper vigilant and hypersensitive to these, then the symptoms seem to take on a greater weight. There's an increase in symptoms because I'm focusing on them. And keep in mind, that's the thing with the panic cycle. It's self-fulfilling. And people think, oh, I have no control. Well, the reality is you're actually doing it to yourself. Now, there are causations we're going to talk about, but this is a cycle. And so as it comes, you're getting into, okay, where am I? Oh my God, my symptoms are increasing. So then you get what's called catastrophic misinterpretation. Something horrible is going to happen. And so you're taking something that's little, small, and really doesn't have a whole lot to do with anything. It's making it a big, terrible thing that I'm going to be foolish, I'm going to have a heart attack, I'm going to have a stroke, something very bad is going to happen. It's a misinterpretation. The brain is now misinterpreting what's happening. And because they've now made this something that's like nothing really here to worry about and made it a huge big deal, then panic sets in. And then we get into this ongoing loop. Common causes. So anxiety can be related to a number of things, okay? And these are things that we talk about, internal and external. It can be stress that comes from something that happens at work, school, or personal relationships. It can be emotional trauma. And when we say trauma, that is something that can have a lasting impact, not something that's just, you just had a fight with the wife or your husband or whatever. I mean, this is something where you're talking either some type of accident, some type of emotional abuse, some type of physical abuse, some type of mistreatment, some type of event out in the street, something like that. Financial concerns. Is there a legitimate worry about things of, I could lose my house, I could lose my lifestyle, I could lose my job that supports all these things. These are external causations. Chronic or serious medical conditions. That is so understated, but it can be such a big contributor for anxiety. The big thing that we have with us, that we take the cradle to the grave, is this. We like to think we have control over our bodies or control over our mind. And when either of that comes into the question, then it's hard to think of us having control over our environment, because if I have a serious illness that I cannot stop and it's debilitating, then we become anxious that we're going to be able to do what we need to do on a normal basis, and we're either going to risk losing our life or be in more pain, or both. A major event or performance, that's something coming up that you have to gear up for, that you're somehow going to be evaluated on, or what have you. Certain medications themselves can have side effects that can cause anxiety, and those are physiological causes. Alcohol consumption and drugs such as cocaine or any stimulants can promote reactions that feel like this. And of course, lack of oxygen, because then the body feels like it's starving for it, and then you feel like you're suffocating, and that can send somebody in a panic cycle. So some of the most common causes include low serotonin levels. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter. And if you think of yourself having an electrical chemical system in your body, that if I raise my hand, my brain is not actually saying, okay, hand raise up. It's just doing it because you've decided to do it. Well, it's kind of like the difference between the internet and the old telegraph system. You have a neuron with dendrites, and this one is firing an electrical message here, and it's firing this one, which is firing this one and firing this one. Well, these things do not touch. These babies do not touch here. There's an electrical chemical message here that shoots this message down here that's from my brain to my hand saying raise it, shoots a message down here. The electrical charge fires this one, fire this one down the line. The thing that allows them to jump is what's called a neurotransmitter. And as this firing happens and this firing happens, it eats up a little bit of the neurotransmitter in our bodies. And because that neurotransmitter level goes down, then we have a physical problem that causes psychological symptoms. And serotonin regulates the feelings of pleasure, contentment, serenity, things like that. There are other neurotransmitters, dopamine, norepinephrine, noradrenaline, these types of things, and they regulate different types of things. And the medications that are used, for example, like SSRIs, which is an antidepressant, and SSRI stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is a fancy way of saying there's too much getting sucked up in our body. And all these medications do are they coat the ends of these things so that they don't suck up so much serotonin. That's all it does. So when somebody says I'm on an antidepressant, that's not a happy pill, and it's not something that does something that messes with your mind. That's the chemical effect. It just coats these types of things. And so serotonin levels affect two things. One is anxiety, and the second one is depression. And there's a huge, huge comorbidity with those two. If I'm seeing somebody for depression, I'll look for anxiety. If I'm seeing somebody with anxiety, I'm always looking for depression. Doesn't mean it's always there, but usually there's some level of that in there. And this type of medication will treat both. But anxiety, the good thing about anxiety is one of the most treatable conditions without any medications. Okay? So here's other things. What other are causes? A shy or nervous type of constitution as a child, a family history of anxiety or other mental health disorders. They can absolutely run in families. Depression runs in families. Anxiety runs in families. There is absolutely such a thing as a predisposition to that. And all you have to do is look at mom, dad, grandpa, and see who's what. And again, past or present stressful, negative life or other events. So here's some signs that you're experiencing anxiety. Includes an overall feeling of nervousness, of apprehension, excessive worry. And the key is the word excessive. There are certain things that having some worry about is normal. Now, one of the things you find with somebody who feels like they have an anxiety disorder, may well have an anxiety disorder, is feeling like the notion that me being in a good place means I don't have any anxiety or any worry about anything. And if we harken back to what I said in the first place, that's not the case. So people worry that, oh my God, I'm a little anxious about something. Must be getting symptomatic again. Oh no, and they start down that panic cycle. When all of us, we go through a variety of emotions, interactions on a daily and hourly basis. So there are things that you are either going to have a few ongoing worries about, or some things that it's important that you do worry about because that worry might activate you to take some action towards it. Feelings of danger, panic, or dread. Are these feelings related to something that has some external causation, or are they internally generated that have no logical or reasonable connection to something out there? Trouble concentrating, distraction, cannot feel like you can stay with whatever you're doing. Feeling irritation, being irritable, being on edge all the time. And again, difficulty controlling feelings of worry. Physical feelings that accompany anxiety include restlessness, elevated heart rate. So you're not going to see a lower heart rate. It's going to be an increased heart rate with increased breathing, more shallow breathing, which means you're not fully oxygenating your system enough. Muscle tension. And it can be tensions in ways you're not aware of. It can be headaches, tension around the neck and shoulders, chest, breathing, muscles, arms, hands, etc., all the way down through your legs and through your feet. It can also have GI disturbances in terms of gastrointestinal, feeling in your stomach, your gut. So you have rapid breathing, and again, that rapid shallow breathing increases the carbon dioxide levels, which makes your body feel like you're starving for oxygen. And as the body feels that way, it's going to try and seek more oxygen. So again, that's cyclical. Sleep problems. And as worry or anxiety keeps somebody up, the fact that you're going to have shortages of sleep, be sleep deprived, that in itself can mimic all these types of feelings just in alone. Fatigue, all that type of thing. So, and these are easy to mistake that, oh my God, I'm having troubles again now with panic. Fatigue, thyroid troubles. For anybody who is experiencing ongoing anxiety or depression, one of the things to make sure to do is you have a good medical checkup with your doctor, because you want to rule out that there's no physical causations to this. Thyroid is one of the first things we check. Low T levels, low thyroid levels, are associated with depression and anxiety. Other things that can cause mental and emotional difficulties are things as simple as urinary tract infections, particularly in females, particularly in older females. And that can bring somebody to a really bad place fairly quickly. But it's also something that's easily correctable. And when correctable, you'll see the cognitions, the brain functions come back to normal. Heart disease, diabetes, because your chemistry is so up, and when you're starting to, if you have like low blood sugar because of diabetes, then you start feeling a little dizzy, a little disoriented, a little unsure of yourself, and anxious about this, when simply blood sugar may be low. Again, respiratory disorders, COPD is a big one, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, that's difficulty with the lungs, the expansion of the lungs, and feeling like, former smokers, things like this. It makes you feel like you're gasping for air, struggling for air, and that can heighten feelings of anxiety. Drug use or withdrawal, as we talked about, chronic pain, and irritable bowel syndrome are things that people will see as problematic. Okay, managing your anxiety. So the first step is, as I said before, an educated consumer is our best customer. This is something that information can only help. The more you know about it, the better. With any mental health disorder, the more you know about it, the better. I'll be doing a presentation in a couple of weeks about depression and suicide. One thing I can tell you as a therapist, and I'm still a little new at this, I've only been doing this for 40 years, is that you will never give somebody the idea of suicide by asking about it. They're either thinking about it or they're not. And so by you asking about it and help sharing the waters with them, that weight of it, you help reduce loneliness, isolation, and help whatever they can talk out reduces the chances that they will act out. So managing anxiety, the first step is to learn as much as you can about it through a thorough understanding of what's going on with you, what goes on with anybody, and the more you understand, the less it's going to seem like a big mystery. And the less it seems like a big mystery, the more manageable it becomes. And the more manageable you have an experience of working with this, then you have success built on success, where you're going to say, okay, I got this. I got this. I've been through this before. I know what this roller coaster ride is about this. And I'm not going to panic about this because I've seen it before. We're going to let this roll over. When anxiety comes, accept it. It is part of life. Don't run from it. Don't try to escape from it. Simply wait for it to pass. If anybody has ever thought about sitting on a beach right at the water's edge, and if you sit there kind of in a lotus position, if you ever sat there with the waves coming in there and try to strengthen yourself and brace yourself up against the wave, what happens? The wave comes in hard, hits you right in the chest and knocks you over on your Aunt Fanny, right? But when you lay down and let it just wash over you, that's what it does. And that's what we're talking about here. So, of course, another way to look at it is it's like being on a train, looking out the window and saying, okay, I'm going to be an observer of this and say, but I don't have to get off at this station. I don't have to get off in this situation. I'm going to just observe this. So the symptoms of anxiety can be terrifying, but they're not going to harm you. And they're not going to kill you. And you say, oh, I could have a heart attack. Okay, you could. But have you? No. I'm going to lose control. You could. But have you? No. So it's a whole new process. And there is not a one size, this is what I do, because everybody is a little different. You've seen one person, you've seen one person. However, there are several things that you can do that are important, are things that are helpful in trying to marshal your forces to cope. First of all, being physically active, okay? For anybody who's had kids or grandkids, and you see kids that are like really, they're inside too long, and they're just going off the deep end. You ever heard the saying, okay, let's get them outside and let's blow some stink off of them? That's exactly, Katie says that. Yeah, she's shaking her head because that's what happens with her all the time, right? So you know, this is the kind of thing we do. Now, keep in mind something. Right now, during this whole COVID thing, and unfortunately, and I hope people on this this presentation really have taken the time to get their vaccinations, because there was and is a real threat out there, particularly if you're an older individual, that COVID was and is still a threat that we all need to take seriously. There's over 500,000 people across this country who have died, and many more who got sick. During 2020, it was the third leading cause of death. So you're seeing all sorts of people right now who, because of the anxiety of not wanting to be sick, not wanting to die, not wanting to lose a job, not wanting to lose a loved one. So there is a real threat out there, a real credible real credible threat. So people who prior to this really had no major issues with anxiety are now. And some also with depression because there have been losses out there. People have lost people close to them. They have lost jobs. They have had their livelihood threatened. They've also had their routine threatened. And people know that routine is very important to us. Those are the things that we do to prepare for bed, prepare to get up, things that help anchor us. And the things that anchor us are our routine and connection to others. Some people are connected to a lot of people. That's what they need. Some people are connected to a very precious few, and that's what they need. That's okay. But all that had become threatened during the whole COVID when you could only do you couldn't reach out and touch your loved ones, your kids, your grandkids, what have you, because of this. So keep stress in check by keeping as physically active as you can. It does wonders for releasing stress hormones like cortisol. Cortisol is a stress reducing hormone that you really can't replace otherwise, other than having that kind of physical activity. Eat a balanced diet, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, everything that you've grown up with said, okay, cut down on the processed food, the greasy, high sugary kinds of things, the high fat, all the huge starches. Food is fuel, and if we look at it that way, say, okay, what do we need to do to keep our chemistry good? Write down your stress and anxiety triggers, because most people, up to 70% of the population, are visual learners. Your primary source of information is visual. The second most is auditory. The third is tactile. And the fourth is something called kinesthetic. It's that gut sense of feeling you have. But when you listen to somebody's verbs, you say, okay, I see what you're talking about. Well, no, you don't. You hear what I talk about. Oh, we say, oh, I see it. So when you read something, it goes to a different part of the brain than when you just hear something. And it also looks like, oh, okay, I can take that in, I can think about it, I can process it, and it imprints in a different way. The other thing is when you write something down, you're taking it from out there in the ethereum and putting it on paper where you can then look at it and say, okay, this is what I'm dealing with here. And it becomes less menacing to name it, describe it, and put it on paper. Again, when I talked about is, before we talk about challenging negative thoughts and worries, when you suffer with anxiety or you know somebody suffering with anxiety disorder, take that time to find out what did they experience first and what's most prominent. So if somebody says, well, I just, all of a sudden, my heart was racing up, my muscles were tension, I wasn't thinking about anything. It came out of nowhere. And you will hear that. And I have heard that. First of all, I would say a couple things to that. If that's the progression of how you've experienced it, what happens is the brain will then fill in the blanks for you. So if you're having all these symptoms and you're all tense and tight, but you don't know what's happening, give it a couple of seconds, because the brain will say, well, it must be this, it must be that, and kind of fill it in, whether it's that or not. So that's why I say when it's physical symptoms first, that's where you go to in terms of what do we do? What do we address first? And all people I work with, and a few are on medication, but most aren't, we're able to successfully really reduce anxiety without anybody being on medications. When it's necessary to get the chemistry right, sure, great, all for it, see your doctor, okay? No problem. But on the other hand, it's good to try other things first, because anxiety and depression are the most treatable mental disorders without medication. So, assuming that your thoughts are some kind of thoughts first, then you say, okay, I need to challenge these thoughts. Oh, no, I can't look at them. Just the opposite. The more you run away from the thought, the bigger it gets. The more you can bring it down to size, saying, okay, wait a second. Let's do some fact check. When has this ever happened? How do I know this is going to happen? I feel like I'm going to die from it, but you haven't. The person you know hasn't. So you're looking at saying, okay, what are my cue cards? And sometimes you even write these things down as cue cards, as grounding cards to say, all right, every time I think of this, I'm pulling out this, like, oh, wait a second. Conversely, we'll talk about physical strategies to ground ourselves. So again, you are taking and replacing, you're having a conversation with yourself. So if the anxiety thought is, my wife's going to leave me, why your wife's going to leave me, my wife's going to leave me. How long have you been married? 30 years. Has she left you? No, she hasn't left you. Do the dishes, or she will, but you know. So anyhow, you know, then first of all, get enough sleep. Okay, if you're sleep deprived, you're going to be more irritable, more anxious, and your body's going to be telling you something. So you want to get at least 7 hours sleep at night. If you're not sleeping, there's all sorts of ways you can, what they call sleep hygiene, is to get consistent sleep. You know, if you've got the TV on at night, it's firing up in your, electronics on at night, TV, computers, that kind of stuff is actually stimulating your brain. It's not allowing you to go to sleep. So, you know, reading is fine, but putting the TV on for any length of time in bed, if you're having a hard time, is not a good idea. So make sure the bedroom's quiet, remove electronics, and don't do a whole lot of big eating right before bedtime. Finding support from a mutual friend, being able to talk, you know, just being able to have somebody listen is huge in terms of helping people understand, to get feedback. And there's, you know, people listen in two types of ways. Some people listen to reply, other people listen to understand. Treatments and therapies. Now, first of all, I want to go back a little bit. Is we talked about your negative thoughts. So if you're experiencing anxiety and it's mostly physical, that's the place to start. And there are certain things you can do that you do not need a therapist, you don't need any equipment, you just need you. So if you're like breathing deep, breathing very shallow and quick, and you find yourself working yourself up, there are very simple and easy breathing techniques. For example, if I'm talking to somebody who's very agitated or up, I go lower and I go slower. And I lower my voice a bit because time is on the side of the patient person. And they will start keying into my cadence. And they're going to listen because they want to hear what I have to say, especially if I'm listening to them. So you're bringing yourself down. So a couple ways to do that is by doing very slow, very measured, very counted deep breaths. And for example, breathing in while you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, breathing through your nose, exhaling through your mouth, and then counting out, and being very conscious of what you're feeling and allowing yourself to sit back. If you can see what I'm doing with my hands, I'm grounding myself. For example, this is a comfortable leather chair. If I find this very comforting, not only am I enjoying the sensation, but it's focusing my brain to what my hands are feeling, and I feel very grounded and connected where I'm at. Looking around the room, taking a bit to take in, being very mindful of what is happening right now, right there. It's quiet. All the noise is internal. Is there anything happening around me? There isn't. Okay, then that's why I'm keying into that. So deep breathing, visualization. What areas, if you like going to the beach and you love being on the beach, great. You're like being on a bicycle, great. Visualize those types of things. Progressive muscle relaxation. That is where you're starting out and tensing yourself as tight as you can go. It's like making a fist, holding it as tight as you can go, and counting like to 5, and then letting go. Tensing up your arms, counting up 5 to 10, as tight as you can, and then let it go. And when I say let it go, I mean really let it go. Like you're a dish rag, tensing up your top body, and then let it go as much as you can. And you do it for about a minute. Afterwards, you're going to feel like a dish rag. I'm not going to say you're going to look like a dish rag, but you're going to feel like a dish rag. If you feel like a dish rag, I'm going to suspect you're not feeling tense in that moment. Psychotherapy, that's talk therapy. It's very effective with looking at specific anxieties. And some of those may be symptoms. People can have, people present for therapy all the time because they're anxious. But you take a look at saying, what is driving that anxiety? Is it something that is in the here and now? Do they have it for years? Is it something recent? Is there something in their past? What's going on that's fueling that? Is there something that you've been through some very traumatic types of things and now it's coming out later? Okay, then these are things you can look at. But you're really looking at specific treatments that are very cognitive, very behavioral to allow somebody. And if you don't have all this stuff, anxiety is very treatable without having to go into all the past. If the past is an issue, then that's fine. Then you have to look at that. What's fueling that? Because there may be traumatic events that are fueling people's anxiety, and we have to deal with those. If it's not, you've seen people who are very good, safe, childcare years, and all of a sudden present with an anxiety disorder. What's going on with that? What are those messages? And you can help bring somebody down in very short order. Medication, if the chemistry needs to be adjusted, that's fine. There's really a couple different types. First of all, the ones that are very effective are, for example, the SSRIs, as I mentioned before, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Those are families of antidepressants that are also have a great efficacy for anxiety, because the mechanisms, as we talked about, the neurotransmitters are very similar. There's another type of medication called Benzodiazepines. Those are very quick acting. Xanax, Ativan, those types of things. They bring down symptoms very quickly. However, the downside is they kind of just mask the symptoms, and they can encourage dependency. So you have to be very, very careful with those things. If you can, you try to avoid those, but you talk to your doctor about those. Support groups from other people, learning who says, how did you cope with this? What did you do? And information is power here. It's the more you feel like you know, the better. We talked about some stress management techniques, learning yoga, meditation, any of those things that put you in the here and now and ground you. Then you realize, you take stock of it afterwards and you say, okay, how am I feeling right now? Well, I'm not feeling anxious. Well, then you brought yourself down. Knowing you can do it breaks the panic cycle And I would say that panic cycle diagram that I showed you is very important to be able to say, where am I in this cycle? Because it's like the merry-go-round. You can get off of it by knowing where you're at. It's interruptible at any of those levels. It's not like, okay, I'm going down this rabbit hole, nothing I can do. At every single step, there's an off-ramp. Cognitive behavioral therapy is the most effective treatment for anxiety. It looks at changing your thoughts, changing your behaviors of what you do. And that's why I distinguish between what are you experiencing first. Is it experiencing it up here or is it coming down here? If you don't know, we go after both of those things. So again, we talked about generalized anxiety, panic disorder. A phobia is a focused fear that something, spiders, rats, heights, water, something has become the target for those phobias. Now remember, I'm down here at the Raft building, and somebody might say you have a fear of heights. Well, if you stand up and look out the window 12 stories down, if I fall out the window, I am going to die. There is something to be afraid of there, okay? So that's okay. But if you, for example, have walked out into the street and you almost got hit by a car, you said, okay, now I can't even cross the street. That may not be a phobia. That may be what's called an overdetermined fear. You have to be on the lookout for cars, but make sure you can still cross the street. And again, we talked about when should you consider medication for anxiety, possibly of short term if it's too paralyzing. But again, these other things, therapy, exercise, self-help strategies, mostly work just as well or better without having any of the side effects of medications. You keep those if need be. It's a tool in your arsenal. And I think we talked about the SSRIs, SNRIs they inhibit the uptake of norepinephrine. Norepinephrine's a form of adrenaline. When you have too much adrenaline in your body, you know what that's like. Okay? And beta blockers are others. Questions?
We have a few, but first, Mark, I want to thank you for giving all of that information in such a clear and understandable way. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
The first question that I'm seeing here is, if you have anxiety or depression in your family, what percentage will your children have anxiety or depression?
There's no magic formula. There's no magic. If you have, if it runs like up the maternal side, for example, you know, you have it, your mom had it, and that type of thing, but it's really not on the parents, on the father's side, you're talking anywhere between a 25 and a 50% chance. But there's no guarantees. You can have anxiety disorders run in families, and some people are touched by it and some are not at all. I would take the position that don't assume somebody's going to get it. Just be on the lookout for it if somebody does have it or showing symptoms. And you can say, look, if grandma had it too, you have it, we runs into it. And because the other thing is it takes the stigma away from it. And stigma, remember, when I describe the medications, these weren't happy pills. Any type of mental illness is a physical condition with psychological symptoms. And that's important to realize. Because if you reduce the stigma of asking for help, then you can say, this is very treatable.
Definitely. Thank you, Mark. Next I'm seeing, hi, Katie, Mark is marvelous.
I'll need your address, and you need to send that to my wife and kids on a daily basis to make sure they're aware of that.
Okay. I know we're coming up on time here, but we do have a couple more, Mark, if that's okay with you.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Next we have a consistent sleep schedule. All electronics are off 1 hour prior to sleep. Some nights I can't fall asleep, toss and turn after 90 minutes. I'll take half a Xanax. Is this common in senior citizens?
It can be. but I would be looking at a number of things as you get older. For example, has anybody ever had a sleep study? You know, if somebody, for example, has sleep apnea, having something that coffee or any type of pop or soda, you know, into the evening, or chocolates types of things. There are certain things that sleep can be problematic for a number of reasons, other than anxiety. Um, so I would refer you to your doctor first of all, um, because you want to make sure that there's no physical causation to that. And some people, you can also have sleep issues run in family too. Insomnia is a condition all its own that may be totally unrelated to the anxiety. And so there's a sedative effect to the Xanax, which in the initial part, well, will knock somebody out or potentially do that. But that Xanax is very short lasting. The half-life of Xanax is essentially up to about 3 hours. And so at that point, are you really getting good REM sleep on that type of thing? And if somebody's napping during the day and not feeling tired at night, then you also want to look at that, because maybe you just need to not nap during the day. A lot of things you want to look at, and the best place to start with that is with your doctor, and be really careful about using benzodiazepines like Xanax as kind of a sleep aid. I'd be very careful about that.
Thanks, Mark. The last question I'm seeing right now is, I wake up during the night with panic attacks, so I don't know what I'm thinking about to bring them on.
Well, if you're waking up, that means you're probably dreaming. And, you know, none of us have control over what we dream. And whether you wake up feeling like you're in a panic, or whether it happens during the day, it's the same type of technique. If you, if you wake up and you're feeling all of these symptoms, is to ground yourself. It's the very first thing. Where am I? Do I feel comfortable in the bed? Tactile, get up, change routine. If it was a bad dream, and like I said, you're having dreams on a nightly basis, that could be the subconscious mind talking about, saying, okay, is there something that's bothering you that you're not aware of? And whether you have somebody in your own personal life and world that you can share this with and get those feelings, because if those stresses aren't being dealt with, they can come out in our unguarded moments. So it's really a question of, is there something that's going on that's really making me have the dreams? And the dreams are not usually one-to-one representational. That threat that you feel in the dream doesn't usually mirror exactly what's going on during the day. And you may say, well, there's nothing going on that I know of. And sometimes with our histories, what doesn't make sense in the here and now might make sense back then. If you've had a rough life, but it was years ago, can that kind of thing come out later on? The other thing comes out, especially as we're getting older, is if we have a few more worries than we used to have when we were younger, more fit, healthier. If we're now dependent on somebody else, we've got some physical ailments we didn't have before. These are all things that can keep somebody up at night and cause them to worry. We all remember when we were younger and indestructible, but we start getting to a certain age and we start feeling a little more vulnerable. And that vulnerability is some of the price we pay for getting older. Some of us, hopefully can stay really healthy all the way through, but age takes its toll too. Normal aging.
Thanks for that information, Mark. So I'm just seeing some thank yous. I'm seeing, thanks for a great presentation. You made it very understandable. Thank you, wonderful information. And Mark is so informative and helpful. And actually, this is a good question to you, Mark, and maybe you want to talk about your department, but someone's wondering, where do I find a reputable cognitive behavioral therapy therapist?
The answer is, one of the things is we're really blessed around here. Whether cognitive behavioral therapy is the most common, the most practiced, and the most taught form of therapy. So, you know, if you're somebody from Erie County, you're living close to either a private practitioner or an agency where that is used. And most of the agencies, Spectrum, Human Services, Horizon, Endeavor, any of those types of things, they have all master's trained level therapists who that's their daily bread. And the big thing is, when you go to a therapist, there's two things you want to look for. And just the same way as if you were hiring somebody, is competency and fit. Do they know what they're talking about? Do they seem like they're well versed in it? Do they seem very competent? And then the second one is, do you have a comfort level with them? Do they feel like, some people only want to see a male, or some people only want to see a female, or some people think they want to see one and then they wind up being with somebody else and go, oh, I didn't think this was going to work. And it works just fine. So it may not matter the gender. More often than not, it doesn't. But that's the big thing, is if you don't feel like that's a good fit for you, then keep looking. And that's okay, because your comfort is more important than whatever the therapist thinks. And they know it's not going to be a perfect fit for everybody. So don't worry about hurting anybody's feelings.
All right. Thank you for that information, Mark. Next, I'm just seeing thanks. Very interesting. So before we close here, we'll be back with Mark on May 17th at 10 a.m. for Let's Talk About Suicide and Depression. In the meantime, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us at Senior Services, 858-8526. Mark, do you want to give your number for your department as well?
858-8530 is to our department. And you know, the other number I'm going to give you, first of all, if you ever feel like you're in crisis, certainly there's crisis services at 834-3131, and also 211, because 211 is not for counseling and that kind of stuff, but if you want to know where services providers are, they're the easiest one to remember. I mean, obviously you can call our department, but we're here during business hours, but 211 is just, you know, virtually all the time, as is crisis services. So feel free, and we'll work to get you hooked up.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Mark, thanks for your time. Everyone, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you next time.
Thank you all. Stay well.